So we'll just wait a few seconds for people to filter in. Okay, a few more seconds and then we will get started. Right. Okay, I think we'll get started, Christian. So welcome everyone and welcome to the next session of the Learning and Teaching webinar series hosted by the University of Suffolk. My name is Phil Nicholson and I facilitate the webinar series. So today we're joined by Dr. Christian Dogarou, who is Associate Professor in the School of Social Sciences and Humanities here at the University of Suffolk. Christian is going to present on some research that he is doing around the University of Suffolk's transition from semester to block learning. And Christian's going to present some experiences and some case studies around adapting to block teaching, delivery, assessment, and student engagement. Just a quick reminder, I'm sure we're probably quite used to this now, but Christian will speak for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then the rest of the time for the webinar is allocated to some questions and some discussion. So please do type out your questions as we go along, and we will come to them at the end. So without any further delay, over to you, Christian.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you for the invitation, and thank everybody for joining this. First of all, to say it's not a research project or not a research project yet. It's just sharing my own experience and my own struggles, actually. So it's not a, as I said in my introductory paragraph, it's not a done deal. I'm not telling people the best things to do this, just trying to open a discussion, because I think many other people are in the same position. So as I said, I'll try to present the ways I try to adapt to delivery assessments and strategies for student engagement to block teaching. And I'm using as a case study 2 modules I delivered this year, 2 modules for year 2, level 5. And just to share with you what I've done and what struggles did I have. And hopefully I'm going to raise some questions and some discussions. So a bit of a background. As you all know, we switched to block teaching in 2020, in academic year 2020-2021. And probably don't need to explain anymore what block teaching is, but we had a couple of challenges at the time. There was a pretty short preparation time. If I remember correctly, it was announced in July of 2020, that in September we'll start block teaching. And it overlapped with other struggles, with other disruptive types of delivery we had at the time. So we were teaching from home, it was lockdown. Then we had the teaching with live streaming. So we needed to adapt to a lot of things. So it was difficult to, after 1 year, even 2 years of delivering in block, it was still a bit challenging to determine where the challenges came. Did they come from the teaching in a lockdown? Did they come from, trying to live stream, trying to audience at the same time? And so forth. So basically, I think this was the first year where I could say it was only block teaching purely, for me at least. And a couple of months ago, a dear friend of mine shared the link to a podcast. It's also a seminar series. And there is a link, I can share the link later. Professor John Weldon from Victoria University in Australia, who was one of those who he played a close role in switching Victoria University to block teaching. And it's a very interesting podcast. It was about 45 minutes. And he's making some points, which I'm going to summarize now, which they were actually quite music to my ears, because many of the points he was making were the things I was reflecting myself that might be needed to switch to block teaching. So first of all, he said it's a whole new classroom practice. We need to change that. We need to adapt to that. And one thing he said that I really enjoyed was we need to move even more towards what students need and less what lecturers like to teach. And I think that's an easy trap for us to fall into. We like our subject, we like our topic, and we tend to kind of focus our teaching on that. Block teaching in that very intensive approach makes it even more important to kind of switch what actually students need. He also talked about lean and targeted learning outcomes. They need to be quite clear, and lean in the sense they need to be achievable in 4 weeks of teaching or 5 years of teaching. And for that, he suggested we need to go, or maybe you need to go back to what he called backwards design. You start with the learning outcomes, and then you design your delivery, you design your content, you design your assessment, starting from that. Block teaching, I think, requires more than semester teaching, he says, reflection on practice. And sometimes you need to realign your learning outcomes to the content, to the assessment. The learning outcomes per module are usually quite stable, or you can, but like as he says, sometimes new practices creep in, assessment might change, and you get to a point where actually they are not in alignment. And with block teaching is even more important to make sure they are in alignment. And one of the biggest, and that was for me when I first learned about block teaching, I said, well, everything needs to change from pedagogy, from delivery, but also assessment needs to change, because assessment in block teaching is different than assessment in semester. So he suggested you have to design assessment that's doable with possibility of quick feedback. He did say we should rely less and less on big essays, 3,000-word essays, which again, I fully agree with that. Have the assessment throughout the module, not something as an outcome at the end. And actually, he suggested to have the assessment and classwork combined. So as you go through your delivery, students also work on their assessment. Provide more opportunities for continuous ongoing feedback. Sorry. So based on that, based on my own experience, based on my own thinking about how to better deliver teaching in a block format, those are kind of my suggestions, approaches that I've used, but also struggles, because I think, like everybody else, I've struggled with some aspects. Yes, I agree. Lean and targeted learning outcomes, they need to be aligned with the assessment and with assessment criteria. So you need to have another look at how they streamline and how they align. And with the content, again, going to his idea of backwards design. We discussed, and I remember we discussed in our team about linking across modules, the learning outcomes. So instead of having learning out like in a silo, you have learning outcomes from this module, from that module. You can have learning outcomes for the entire year or for entire pathway, depending how the course is designed for the entire course and the level. And you actually use a scaffolding system in which one module learning outcomes will build for the next one. In terms of assessment, I am a big fan myself of portfolio of activities. Basically, it's a combination of a couple of activities, but the portfolio of activities is considered a single component. And for me, there are a number of advantages to use that, and makes it even more applicable to block teaching. First of all, you can design small activities within the portfolio that you can apply, deploy throughout the module. As we said earlier, you can have multiple elements of the assessment, so kind of small elements which can build on each other. And they can also have some variety, some diversity, so you can combine different things to address different learning styles of our students, but not too many. I mean, it's not a good idea to have a portfolio of activity with 10 activities in 4 weeks' time. It's not feasible. But as I said, you can have a variety of types. You can have small presentations, small pieces of writing, time-consuming activities, and so forth. And it provides some flexibility. And the thing is, for me, in the UK context especially, The way we deliver, and especially the way we administer courses, I think it's a bit more bureaucratic than other countries. So we need to, you need to go to a pre-board, you need to go to a board. So students usually get their results quite late after the end of the module. But with a portfolio of activity with small elements, you can be more flexible in actually providing students, a unratified grade and feedback so they can use it. Using a portfolio of activities, however, comes with some administrative challenges in terms of setting up grades, setting up extenuating circumstances, students saying, well, I want an extension of this component on this element of portfolio. And I say, well, it's the whole portfolio, that's a component. So those need to be thought through as well. But for me, the main advantage of using a portfolio of activities instead of 3 different components of the assessment is that you can be much more flexible. We all know that if you want to change an assessment, for example, if it didn't work very well this module and want to change it for next year, it's a kind of a long process. There's a course modification system in place. You need to do it quite early. While if you have a portfolio as an assessment, a single component called portfolio of activities, let's say, then whatever you do within the portfolio, the elements of the portfolio, they don't need to go through that process. You can be much more flexible with how you design it. In terms of assessment, continuing with the assessment, one of my I think even more applicable to block teaching when you have a very short period of time of delivery and a very short period of time of assessment to work on assessment for the students. I think we need to have a bit of a less emphasis on what we call academic writing. I'm not quite sure what academic writing means, to be honest. And we do not really teach academic writing. We, as academics, might think that we are good at academic writing, and that might be true or not. We've not regularly tested on that. But the thing is, we don't teach that. And of course, students need to know how to write and to write academically, but if you put too much emphasis on that, actually the students can be at disadvantage. There is the same thing about referencing. I think from my own experience, students are over-obsessed with referencing. And actually, we need to teach referencing better because students hear different stories from different lecturers, and sometimes they don't match at all. I myself put less emphasis on a strict word count, especially upper limit. The students come to me and say, it says 2,000 words. What if I go over? I said, if you go over, I don't much care. I'm not that strict about it. I don't want them to obsess with these little things. I want them to focus on the content. I want them to focus on the knowledge, on the critical thinking, on being creative with their answers to the assessment. Another thing I've introduced, and I've introduced before switching to block teaching in my practice, is the use of practice tests. So if you have a bank of, use of practice tests is very good for testing the knowledge and understanding, less for critical thinking or academic writing. But I'm using test banks, multiple choice questions or short open-ended question in which students, they practice their knowledge. And I say, if you don't get it right, you go back to your reading, you go back to your lectures, you can go back to your lecturer, to me, and ask, why did I get it wrong here? And this year also I started using bonus point activities. Brightspace allows you to do that. So bonus point activities are activities that are not mandatory, but they can gain points, which are going to be above and beyond. So on top of the points they gain for their assessment, they can gain extra points. So for example, if they don't do very well on the portfolio, but they've done 3 bonus point activities, they can compensate. And bonus point activities are also quite useful in my practice this year with the students, to getting them motivating them to get more engaged with the learning. So I use them with quite good success. In terms of feedback, again, even more important in block teaching, because it goes by so quick, is to offer opportunities for ongoing feedback. and actually to use assessment for ongoing feedback. As I said, I'm using the portfolio activity elements to give myself a chance to give students feedback, and students would be much more motivated to engage with that feedback because they can apply it in the same module. I was watching another podcast about feedback, and they discussed this difference between formative guidance, how you guide students throughout the module, versus some summative commentary, which usually is at the end of the module. The students are less likely to, they can't use it for the same module, obviously, if you have just commentary at the end after when you mark, and they're not very likely to use it for other modules. In terms of ongoing feedback, besides using the elements of the portfolio as building up their assessment and giving them feedback, this year I also tried using non-mandatory blog entries. I said, if you like a blog entry, a draft of your element of the portfolio, I can give you a quick feedback, or it's a draft of the final, let's say, research proposal. I can give you a quick feedback on that. But they don't have to, it's up to them. But I've got many students actually taking that opportunity. There's a matter of engagement and communication. This is where I struggle a bit more. Block teaching is quite intense. You meet them 3 times a week for 3 hours or 2 hours each day, and you need to give them engage. Of course, you don't want to lecture, and it's not recommended to be lecturing all the time. But how to give them in that intensive is quite tiring for the students as well. So I struggled to find activities, to find things for them to do to stay engaged. I've been more successful with online interactive platforms. I've been using Slido this year, but things for which you can get an account, university account with full features. But you can have Mentimeter, AHA slides, things like that. What I also strongly recommend is using multiple communication avenues with the students throughout the module. Use email, use team chat, blogs, and response time to student inquiries needs to be much quicker. I mean, you have to answer within the same day, at the most within 24 hours. I think there was in the past a kind of a practice that, 5 working days, you can't, 5 working days, it's 1/4 of the module. You have to be quick. So while you teach a module, you have to be really immersed into that module in order to another thing I'm struggling myself to find a fine balance, and the students also struggle, is the amount of reading. When you have 12 weeks of a semester, students have time to engage properly with reading at their own pace. When you deliver 3 topics in a week and you have 4 weeks, it's difficult for them to keep up with the same amount of reading you would have had in a semester. So I don't know the answer to that. A slimmed down reading list, maybe preparing some specific booklets for the module in which you condense essential reading, lecture notes, lecture outlines. So each module comes with a kind of a booklet. I don't know. Here is probably something we can discuss at the end of this session, and I'm very happy to get any feedback myself. So those were my kind of, based on my experience, based on what other people have said, kind of my take on what you can do to adapt to block teaching. So as a case study, again, I'm gonna use 2 modules that I delivered this year. They are both level 5. It's happened to be the same cohort of students, the entire cohort of BA childhood students, about 40 students, which is a big-ish class size. During block 3, I delivered a module called Children's Ecologies, which is a theoretical module, and the block 5, a module Understanding Research, which is the research methods module. And I'm trying to link them into the next year's independent project or a dissertation. So I know if I'm still sharing the screen. I hope I'm still sharing. So Children's Ecologies, just a brief look at it. It's basically applying a theoretical framework let's look at. So we'll introduce students to a systems thinking as applied to childhood and development of the children with an ecological model. So basically it's a kind of a framework that they can use within that big framework, which bridges psychology, biology, psychology, and sociology. They can use whatever other theories are more appropriate for their topic. So I thought this would be a good starting point for them thinking, okay, I have a topic of interest. I can use this framework to kind of approach it. And then I said, when you go to the research methods, understanding research, you can then take that topic and turn it into a research project. So the understanding research, well, that's the typical research methods module. With its own Brightspace page. Learning aims, learning outcomes. Right, let's see if I can go back to my sharing. So the things that I've tried in delivering those modules, for children psychologists, that was a very new module, never delivered before. So of course you have that, I have that experience with teaching a new module. What do I do? What do I teach? What are the best things to do? In terms of assessment, it was a portfolio of activities and time-constrained activities. There were two elements. For the portfolio, I tried a negotiated approach. I said, okay, the portfolio is kind of open. We can put in it whatever you want. Initially, I had 4 elements. With them discussing, they agreed actually they are better with 3 elements. I asked them to pick their own topic and apply this theoretical framework to that topic, but they've struggled a bit with that because during the first year 1, they were kind of told, for this module, you need to do this topic, for this module, you didn't need that topic for the assessment. So it was a bit of a struggle for them. And with later discussion, we said, okay, you can, maybe next year for the next cohort, the students can give me their main overall topic of interest, and then I can help them find more specific topics that can be actually more applicable. So for my portfolio of activity, I said there's 3 elements. First element, after week 2, you just describe the theoretical framework that you've just learned about in your own words. You don't need to give me references because I know it's Urie Bronfenbrenner's theory. In the second element of the portfolio, you go and find on the topic of interest other people who have applied that theory, the bioecological theory. And then the third element of the portfolio, try to map your own topic of interest on that theory. So kind of building a bit their development of, how do I take a theoretical framework and apply it to my topic. For time-constrained activities, which was a multiple choice questionnaire, first of all, I used practice tests. Every week I had a new set of practice tests, and I said use them. And week 4, I used 1 hour of a seminar as simulation. I said, okay, in class, it's a simulation. They had a full set of questions, 1 hour. And at the end, there was a combination of multiple choice and open-ended. And at the end, we discussed them. I said, what did you find? Yeah, some of them said open-ended questions were quite good, but too many. Some of them were saying, well, some of the multiple choice questions are. So I had a bit of a good feedback from them and actually adapted. So when I had the final exam, I said, okay, I'm going to reduce a bit the number of open-ended questions because they couldn't manage the time very well. I used bonus points as well throughout the module for assessment. But what came after delivering this module and actually after being part of, there's another research project about co-designing assessment. While you can't fully co-design your assessment with your students, they can benefit if you are absolutely clear from the beginning, at the beginning of the module, go through the learning outcomes. Those are the learning outcomes. Those are the assessment criteria. And this is how the assessment elements will help you reach the learning outcomes. And if they are clear about that from the beginning, they are much more likely to understand what you're trying to do. Linking across modules, as I said earlier, I think in block teaching you run this danger of being in silos. And how do you do that? I tried, partially successful, to link to understanding research. As I said earlier, I told them, you know, you take a topic of interest. Next block, I said in understanding research, you'll need to develop a research proposal. Next year, you'll need to develop, you know, you need to do a piece of research. You need to do your dissertation. You can start now, pick a topic of interest, you know, from past modules, whatever we've done in year one, especially, try to frame it more theoretically. And then when we move to understanding research, and I told them it's going to be me also teaching them, you can take it from there and actually turn it into a research project. It was partially successful. I think I needed to emphasize that more. In terms of engagement, again, I said I was struggling with that. It was a very quiet class. Whenever I was trying to get them to engage with any activity, discussion, debate, they were quite quiet. And I didn't know it's me scaring them, is the topic or is the, you know. But then I introduced Slido, in which actually it's this interactive. I'm going to have an example at the end of this session, in which actually you can put some questions on the screen and they can answer on their devices, on their computers. And engagement increased. I mean, almost everybody would answer. Then I'll show the answer. Let's go then discuss them. It was quite useful. I also had a mid-module feedback using Slido. I said, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And the next day I discussed their feedback. It was anonymous, obviously. And then I said, I can implement this, but I can't implement that, you know, depending what they said. Okay, understanding research was the second module I've delivered, block 5, previous block. By design, because it's a very complex module and it's a module that students find very challenging and very difficult, we started with an online element, starting block 2. So block 2, 3, and 4, students could engage with some online activities. I use bonus points activities during this period, block 2 to block 4, to motivate them to be engaged. It was mostly reading, some short podcast recording, and I said also the read these topics. Then there is a kind of MCQ at the end to test your knowledge, and you know, you can gain some bonus points. It was difficult for the students. I was discussing with them while I was delivering block 5, and I said, how do you find the online? They said, well, it's quite useful, but still challenging because they're engaged with other modules at the same time. So they need to be quite, you know, they need to stay on top of it in order to engage. But actually, many of them said it was useful. In terms of understanding research, it's a very difficult module for them, as I said, and it's, you know, it's difficult to teach research methods properly in a semester, let alone in a block. So I went back to that idea of making it lean and targeted, and actually try to teach what I think the students need, not what I like to teach. So for example, I took out any statistical analysis. You can't teach in 1 week, week 4 of your block, you know, the entire stats. So I taught them quantitative analysis up to the point where you would start statistical analysis, at least how to develop a good measurement. I started with developing your research question. I said, week 1 is how do you develop a good research question? And I told them, I hope you bring whatever you've learned previously. And in children's psychologists, you know, I asked them to develop a topic. Let's turn it into a research question. And I was quite good, actually. Then each week was dedicated, 1 week to quantitative, 1 week to qualitative, 1 week to non-primary. But it's very difficult for students. It's a difficult block for them. For the future, I suggest to complement block delivery with year-long learning hub sessions, like, you know, those students who want to get more into statistics, they can use that, or, you know, into more advanced qualitative data analysis or data collection can do that. So I think we need to rethink a bit how we deliver that, because understanding research in block, it's a bit challenging. What I've changed for last year in terms of, I think I'm okay with time. Assessment and feedback, I stripped down from previous year. I think in previous year, there were about 7 elements of the portfolio. This time I left only 5. One of them is a research proposal at the end, 60% of the grade. And then each week, 1 activity. So that would be 5 activities in total. So the 4 activities, weekly activities, can be marked quickly and they can get feedback as we go, as I said. I also offered opportunities for informal feedback. So I said, okay, we are in the week of quantitative research. You've learned about how to develop a measurement and all these things. If you write a blog entry, how would you approach your research question from a quantitative approach? I can give you feedback, and then you can say, well, maybe it's not for me. I'm going to wait for the week of qualitative research. And then you can write a blog about how I would approach the same topic, but from a qualitative research approach, and I can give them feedback. So I gave the students opportunity to do that. Obviously, on a blog within a week, you don't have time to give very in-depth feedback, just kind of pointed feedback. But I think they enjoy that. And also, there was numerous opportunities for informal feedback throughout the module. For understanding research, plans for the future or suggestions for the future is to include bonus point activities during face-to-face session as well, to keep them more engaged. As I said previously, for the previous module, children's psychologists, to discuss with them the learning outcomes, assessment criteria from the beginning, so they are quite clear about what they are assessed on and how the assessment, the elements of the portfolio and assessment kind of fits with that. I would give them more time to discuss the research proposal. I think I gave them, I think it's more than usual, but I would probably spend more than 1 session on that. We will change the research proposal to be a separate component. It's already, we've already had course modification in place, and give them some exemplars of research proposals. The students said they would have very much benefited from seeing how does a research proposal look like, especially if you can have on a different, on the scale of different qualities, from very good one to, not so good. In terms of engagement, I continue to use Slido. They seem to enjoy that quite well. Link across the modules. This time I kind of drilled. I said, use this opportunity, use this module to build up your dissertation, because I said next year going to be very busy. You're going to be developing a research project while learning in block teaching, and it's challenging. Start now. Take it seriously. They did ask me, is it going to be self-plagiarism? I said no, because you start with the research proposal now, but you'll adapt it over the summer and have a full dissertation. You're not going to be marked only on the research proposal next year, so don't worry about self-plagiarism. I'm hoping to have supervisors assigned at the end of this year. They kind of decide on the topics. They'll have received feedback from marking. I'm in the process of marking their research proposals now, so they can work over the summer. They can use the summer to develop their lit review, their methodology. So by the time they come next year, they are going to be almost halfway through. And as I said, I drilled them quite well, because when I did a bit of a feedback activity with you, again using Slido, I said, what do you expect to get out of this module? 90% said, yes, I would like to get a good start on my dissertation. In terms of suggestions, similar to what I said about understanding research itself, I suggest year 3 to continue having some face-to-face sessions like Learning Hub, not within their module, so not mandatory, but to give them an opportunity to re-engage with research methodology, especially some more specific ones. So statistical analysis, maybe 5 students want to do some quantitative dissertations, give them a chance to kind of continue learning that. So conclusion, it was very intensive for me, especially big class 40. And I think one of my struggles was with that. When you want to be so providing feedback continuously, and you have 40 students, and if all of them want to engage with you, then those 4 weeks I didn't do anything else, just focusing on the module. Need to be flexible and transparent, but also students need a bit of predictability. That was my experience with the first block, children's psychologists, when I was a bit very too open at the beginning, and they were a bit freaking out. I said, no, you need to give me a bit more predictable. Integrating assessment into teaching, as I said, I try to use this portfolio activities throughout the module, and for them to build their assessment. Be creative with student engagement activities and continue using bonus project activities. I think they are quite good way of getting them engaged, and also for them to recover some points if something doesn't go well with their assessment. So I've got 10 more minutes for I see a chat box here. Okay, that's fine. So speaking of Slido, if you go to slido.com or scan this code and enter LT 10 May, which is Learning and Teaching 10 of May, I can give you a bit of as just a bit of see how it works from the other side. So maybe I'll take 5 minutes, 4 minutes. And I can keep it open throughout the rest of the discussion. Yeah, thank you. And yeah. I am open to suggestions too. I had a hard time. Padlet group work, getting students present the research ideas. Yeah. I think my struggle was with a big class. Would be difficult to give every student a chance to present. And some students don't want to do that. Go back and forth. Yeah, over 15,000 students, difficult. So I found using this Slido quite engaging actually. And you can save those, you can save the answers. Can discuss them later. Well, looks like it looks like I'm not the only one struggling with student engagement. Less reading, clear signposting. Yeah.
This is really interesting to see.
Maybe I should keep the Slido link open. Yeah. Distributing multiple readings, different students, then getting to share. So good. That's some good ideas, yeah. I think you need to change students' perception of culture a bit, because they are quite, give me the reading, I need to give, you need to give me this, and you should start first, year one, I guess. Intense. Completely rethink curriculum and they'll redesign it rather than cram what you already do. Indeed, you can't cram 12 weeks in 4, even if you think the amount of information is the same, it's just different. But I did like that idea of what students need, not what lecturers like. I think many times I found myself, I need to reflect on that more. Well, thank you very much. I mean, you can continue writing that, but I'm percent issue. I'm willing to see how is the, well, not bad. The score is still smiling. We're still smiling about block, which is good. Okay, happy to take more questions now. Do you read them out, Phil?
Yes, so yeah, we've already got some questions coming through, but thank you, Christian, for sharing that really insightful account of the 2 modules, but also the resources and the ideas around block. And I think it's good to explain block as well to people that maybe aren't too familiar with what the actual change entails. We've got one question that's from an anonymous attendee. It's quite a long one, so do bear with me. Christian, you mentioned that students couldn't do as much reading as they did under the semester system. I've had the same feedback from students, but they are only doing 1 module at a time. So in theory, they should be able to do 3 times the reading that they would have done under the semester system. So with this in mind, do you think that students are allowing themselves enough time for their studies? And they've just added that from their experience, they feel that students don't understand that they should be studying full-time. Work, family and other commitments, for example, seem to take priority. Does block and perhaps the lack of social activities on campus encourage students to think of their studies as only a part-time thing?
Well, I definitely think that could be true, but I can't speak on behalf of the students, how they approach to learning, and I think it's a wide variety, and I think would be similar in the semester. But going back to reading, I get the point of they only have a module, but it's so fast-paced. So you have a topic today and have another topic tomorrow, and then you have another topic on Friday, and then next week you have another topic. So keeping up with reading, even if you read 3 times, or even if you read the same amount of reading as in a semester, because you read across 3 modules, I think the intensity of changing and keeping up with the topic makes it much more challenging. And especially because it's the same topic and you try one chapter today, chapter tomorrow, whatever it is. When you have 3 modules at the same time, you can actually rest your mind from one module by reading on the other module. And I remember one of my tutors telling me that. I said, if you want to rest from chemistry, go and read some biology. So I think it's not sufficient to say, well, you've got the same amount of reading as in semester, why don't you do it? I think the intensity of it, it's difficult for them to keep up with.
Okay, that's really interesting, and thank you for that reflection and question. So Marta, thank you for your question, Marta. Marta has asked, thank you for the talk. I wondered, you've mentioned the importance and need for flexibility, but also students' appreciation for predictability, especially due to the fast pace of modules. How do you manage these perhaps competing needs?
Well, by discussing with them and being open and transparent, as I said, especially the first one, children's ecology. Understanding research is quite technical, so you can shape it much easier. But the first one, it was a new module for me to teach. It was a module I designed. But when you design a module, you want to put everything in it. And when I started with this more flexible approach to assessment, especially, I said we have a portfolio of activities, but you can pick whatever you want, and we can discuss. They were quite. So once I got the feedback from them, I came back to them and I said, okay, I get it. You want a bit of predictability. What about, we reduced from 4 elements to 3 elements, and those are the topics. What do you think? So we kind of negotiated that. So I think it's a matter of being open and transparent in discussing with them. And you can find different ways. Some of them are very willing to speak up in the classroom. Some of them are not. But if you use those more anonymous ways of discussing, Slido, I found it very useful because it can be anonymous. They can give quick feedback. I put the questions like I did now. At the end of the session, I said, if you want, I keep it open. By tomorrow, I can come back with some answers. So basically discussing and being open for communication. And, you gain their trust if you do that.
So is that almost a case of keeping the dialogue open for, throughout the whole module, the importance of that?
Exactly, and actually really listening to what they need. And again, it's what they need, not what you like to do.
And is that feedback generated in a range of ways, or is that mainly through something like Slido or Padlet, for example?
Well, you can do it in different ways. You can try, but Brightspace is not that good at. They've got a survey thing, which is anonymous as opposed to a quiz. But it's quite not very user-friendly. Some of them are open to discuss in class if you ask, or individually. As I said, contact me, email. If you answer quickly, and the students find that quite, they appreciate that. If you are quick in answering, sometimes I get a Teams message. If I happen to be at my computer, it's 7 o'clock in the evening, and I get a Teams message from my students, I'm willing to answer if it's quick answer, if it requires, it doesn't require much of my time. It's quite important to keep open communication.
That's really interesting. And please do keep those questions coming. A couple of my own questions, if you don't mind, Christian. I'm really interested in that idea about linking and connecting blocks. And I think you provided a really nice example of the 2 modules in your presentation around children's ecologies and then understanding research.
And further to the dissertation, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that kind of, obviously, because you were the module leader right on both of those modules, that maybe it's easier to establish those connections. But perhaps, are there any challenges maybe with connecting with colleagues' modules?
I think not necessarily challenges, but indeed you need a team approach. And John Waldron said the same thing. Even more important in block teaching, you need to actually work as a team for a number of reasons. This being one of them. The second reason is you need to always have somebody being able to step in. If you go off sick for 2 weeks, that's half of the module for the students. You can't just let them hanging. So you need to have somebody else being able to step in quickly and continue. So I think we need more collaboration in, as I said, for example, scaffolding learning outcomes. And not across all modules, because you might have modules on a different, if you have a very psychology module and one sociology might be a bit more difficult, but if you are within the same pathway, like we are in childhood studies or of similar. So yeah, teamwork, really, and this continuously reflecting on that as a team. We do the handover, which is good, block handover, but I think you need to focus. I think we tend to focus on the students themselves, saying student so-and-so is child, student so-and-so engages. We can do more in terms of actually seeing how can we link back across the modules.
Okay, that's interesting. And related to collaboration, do you think that in a block format it's harder to perhaps share modules, do co-teaching, or do you think it kind of lends itself to one module leader who perhaps is responsible for most of the sessions? How do you think that kind of, I guess, division of labor is affected by maybe a 5-week module?
That's a very good question. I think I would tend to think, because a module is so intensive and students are, any small disruption can, can be very disruptive for the students. I think they need consistency if possible. So they need a person, a module leader who's kind of in charge for the module, but still being able to work with other people on the module. That's my just gut guessing in a sense. I think students appreciate that consistency. If it's a semester, in 3 weeks' time you have another lecture, you are already used. You have different lectures, different days, but within the same block, it can be a bit. And if you start developing rapport and understanding of the students, if you keep switching lecturers, will be probably quite disruptive for the students, I guess.
Okay, that's really interesting. Interesting to reflect on that. So we've got a question from Chris and a comment as well, really. So this idea of doing what the students need, not what you think is best as a lecturer, is really powerful. But in Chris's experience, all too often there's a lot of small c conservatism about what students should learn and how they should learn, and how they should be assessed, which can lead to some reticence to put some of this stuff into practice, some perhaps challenges. How do we bring colleagues along with us to ensure we're all supported? Do we need more team teaching, which kind of speaks to that previous question as well?
That's a tough question. We are academics. It's the saying that it's like herding cats, and we've got those big egos. It's difficult to. It's teamwork together, basically working together and kind of giving up your own, that, small c conservatism, and not necessarily team teaching might help, or at least team planning, maybe. So even if a module is delivered mostly by the same person, in order to ensure consistency for the student, maybe the planning of a module should be done more in a team approach, in which people come with their own different views and they say, okay, I think they need this, well, I think they need that. So I think it's easier to come to an agreement if you do it with other people when you're planning the delivery, the content of the assessment, than when you do it on your own, because you are the expert on that module. That's my topic. I'm going to design it the way I think is the best. So my recommendation would be to start to do team planning, but not necessarily team delivery.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I presume you've been at the University of Suffolk, so you did teach semester format. Yeah. Is that right? And I guess, in terms of the direction to go in a block direction, do you kind of feel like across the whole university there's all a range of different creative approaches and interpretations of what it means to teach in block?
I think there are, and I think we need opportunities like this one and other ones in which we can share our practice, share our struggles, share our experiences in teaching block. I think it was struggling for everybody, for us, for students. It was a new thing, and it came in the middle of a pandemic as well. So I don't think anybody had it an easy way. But if you put all this collective wisdom together, we can actually come up with something good.
I think that would be really powerful, a sort of mini conference where course teams almost present on, this is what block means to us and this is how we do it. I think that would be quite a rich learning opportunity, actually.
And you should do it across courses, obviously, within the school at least, if not across schools, but at least at school level you can have some dedicated time, informal, semi-formal, however it is, in which that's what we discuss. What do we do? How do we do it? Maybe having some online like blogs accessible to everybody, and everybody kind of shares their experience. I don't know, something in which we have a platform where we can share our experiences and learn from each other.
Yeah, and that speaks to that reflective nature of almost we've been doing this for 2 to 3 years now, and this is how it's going, and this is the direction that we want to go in for the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
that's interesting, and possibly there's maybe an opportunity there for the webinar series to explore. Scott's made a comment, so thank you, Scott, for joining and your comments. Good point about staff sickness. It's much more difficult to step in and cover colleagues' classes when they are ill, given the length of sessions. Even one day of illness could be an extra half day of unscheduled teaching for whoever covers, and that's not including prep.
Yeah. So I think that, as I said, I think that to shared planning, team planning, then have somebody who understands the module, what needs to be delivered and can be done, and having more material. As I said, I was thinking of this idea of having a module specific booklet or something, a collection of texts in which, like that slim down reading, almost besides having the students to go read for themselves, so that can be used, but well planned in advance, having the lesson plans in advance, having the topics in advance, can help with that. But yeah, that's a real challenge.
Yeah, and that's something I think that I've found as well myself, in terms of particularly on the PG cap, in terms of thinking about what is an appropriate amount of reading, and it's definitely chapters and articles rather than whole books now, isn't it? I feel. Do you share that as well?
I think so, yes. That's a difficult one because we say students should read independently. Indeed, it's just one topic for 4 weeks, but realistically, they might juggle with other, work, home experience, life, and it's a difficult not to crack. I don't know, but a slim down reading and more targeted, but again, if you can link, instead getting out a bit of the silo approach, if you can link across modules and build on that, maybe that's another solution in which actually spread the reading across an entire year, not within a module.
And that, again, that's that linking up, isn't it? And taking that step back and looking at the broader curriculum of perhaps a whole level 5 or a level 6, and how do those modules link?
Yeah. I think we were caught up into, because we were semester and we had the semester modules and we had to implement it so quickly, we basically took the semester modules and turned them into block. And I think it would have been better if you had time to do it from scratch, to develop the course, to redevelop the course from scratch, the module, saying how do we do it? How do you join learning outcomes? How do you join reading? How do you join assessment? You can have, you don't need to have each block assessed separately. You can think of more creative way of assessing, research methods and dissertation can be kind of a single stream of assessment. I don't know. But then you have to go through the whole process of, if you want to redesign, there's this whole bureaucratic process in which you have to go through, and that makes it kind of unmotivating.
Okay, that's interesting. But I guess there's quality assurance processes there as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Consider. Final question then, if I could just, I'm interested in this idea of formative assessment, and if the summative assessment is due in the last week of block 5, where would you say the best sort of space and time within a block format to do a formative assessment where students get feedback on how they have done in that formative task?
As I said, I'm using assessment. If I use a portfolio of activities, they've got an assessment element or element of the portfolio due each week. So the portfolio is not entirely due at the end. So they can get motivated, okay, by Friday or by Monday, you work on this component, and then I can give them feedback within a couple of days. You can have more creative ways. I think in that podcast I mentioned, they were talking about, oh no, I was talking to somebody else. We have 5 weeks actually. A block is 5 weeks. We have 1 week of assessment. But it doesn't say you have to have the week of assessment at the end. Maybe you can have a more relaxed bit in the middle, like 2 weeks for more intensive teaching, 1 week of less or even no teaching. They have an element of assessment. they can get feedback, and then a bit, you can find creative ways of delivery as well. We're kind of stuck with this idea, 4 weeks plus 1. It doesn't need to be like that. And actually the university says, CALC says, you can do it different ways. And I think different models are appropriate for different, depending on the topic of the module. But yeah, again, there's no direct and single answer to that. But I do think assessment, ongoing assessment in which they get feedback is important, even if it's part of the formative assessment, what we call, the formal assessment or not. They need throughout just leaving everything for the end. That I don't think it works for the students.
That's interesting. And I think that they're definitely, I think me personally, I'm very much in that 4+1 mindset.
Yeah.
And thinking about ways to move beyond that would be useful. Well, that's 5 o'clock. So we will leave any questions there, but thank you to those who have asked questions and given comments. But most of all, thank you to Christian for sharing your thoughts and reflections and the case study that you have today. We really appreciate it. In terms of before signing off, I'd just like to signpost you to our next webinar session, which will be delivered by Dr. Pete King, who works at Swansea University. It will be on June the 14th, and Pete will be focusing on can playfulness be used in higher education. So do please keep an eye out for emails and social media posts that will advertise the session and provide details for how you can sign up. But for now, have a lovely rest of the evening, and thank you for joining us. And thank you, Christian.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.